Hey everybody, I cannot believe that January 2021 is already over. This year is going to fly by. I just can't. But it does mean that it's time for a wrap up. So today I'm here to talk to you about the 6 books that I read in January 2021. So let's get started. Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. It's Russell with Ink and Paper Blog. How are you all doing today? I hope you guys are doing very, very well. As always, I hope you're healthy, I hope you're happy, and I hope that you're reading some amazing books. January 2021, start to a crazy year. I have to say, January is always very busy for me at work personally. We're wrapping up 2020. We're doing all our performance evaluations, assessments, all of that sort of wrap up stuff. So it does take a lot of time. So I did not read as much as I normally do because of that. But that's okay, because I did read some really, really good books. So, as always, get out your pen, get out your paper, get out your Goodreads, however you'd keep track of your TBR. If you are so able, let's order a book or two from a local independent bookstore. They still need us, we still need them. And as always, if you are a library user, just get your library to order you a copy so you can get your hands on these as soon as possible. The first book I'm going to tell you about is the very first book I read in 2021. So I know that a lot of readers do this. I know Simon does this, but I always start a new book on the first day of the year. So even if I finish something days before, I won't start anything new if I don't think I can finish it by New Year's Day, because New Year's Day I get up and I crack a new book and I feel like that book is going to set the tone for me for 2021. So I'm so happy to say that the very first book that I read in 2021 was The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., because I adored this book. This is a debut novel. Robert Jones Jr.'s first book is a whopper of a book. This tells the story of love between 2 African-American men on a plantation, and how that love affects not only themselves, but also the other slaves on the plantation owners, the plantation family that lives there, and all of the dynamics of that. Isaiah and Samuel are so well written. Their relationship is so well done. It is really one of 2 very different people coming together, finding one another early in life. And they really do care for each other. And I think if I had to say, my favorite part of this book is the tenderness that Robert Jones Jr. displays between Isaiah and Samuel. But at the heart of this book, it's really about the entire plantation and how their relationship sort of sets different sort of things in motion. So you get very different perspectives in this book. We get perspectives of other slaves, other people from like the owner of the plantation, his wife, his son. And in changing those perspectives, we get to see sort of how the plantation is run and how this relationship, sort of this little nugget of happiness, affects everybody else. There's a lot of discussion in here about how religion looks at gay male relationships, but it also has to do with sort of the control that the plantation owners want to have over the men and women that are on the plantation. We also get to see sort of the relationships between the different women. We get to see sort of this tie back to the traditions of where they came from. And the other thing that he does really, really well is he ties it back to sort of some tribal folklore that talks about people that came from Africa, or lived in Africa actually, who were similar to Isaiah and Samuel, and how the idea of love between 2 Black men transcends modernity. That's not the word I want. It doesn't sit only in our current time, that it has been going on for ages and ages and ages. And that part of the story is just so hopeful and beautiful. Now, as you can imagine, this is a book set in slavery times. There's a lot of heartache in it. There's a lot of trauma in it. And that part of it is so real, and it would be impossible to write a book like this without having that in it. But what it really does talk about is relationships. It talks about love. It talks about truth, and it talks about owning who you are. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I did find that all of the sections, I really like the sections from the slaves themselves. I thought their voices were just powerful and strong. When we switched into the voices of the plantation owner and the wife and the son, I understood what was being done, but I just really wanted to rush back to Isaiah, Samuel. There was a woman named, I want to say Maddie, but I want to make sure that that is correct before I'm wrong. She was the cook in the kitchen, Maggie, and she sort of looked over this relationship and sort of kept everybody respectful of it. And I just loved her. I loved a lot of the characters in this book. So I just wanted to rush back to them. That was my point. I think it's this beautiful novel. It will tear your heart out. It will make you cry, but it will also leave you with a sense of hope and wonder. And as this is a debut novel, Robert Jones Jr. has nowhere to go but up, because he is phenomenal. So that's The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. This is out now from Putnam Books. You can get your hands on it. I highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so the next book that I read was a book that is coming out on the 9th. So we only have to wait a few days here. And that's The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott. This is coming out from FSG Originals, and this is an Aussie Lit title. This book is the story of, so how do I want to say this? This starts with sort of this folklore tale about a rain heron that comes to a woman who is running a farm that is just not successful. And when the rain heron arrives, sort of her whole entire fortune changes. And then something occurs and the rain heron goes away and everything changes back. Then we sort of go into this dystopian world where we meet a woman who's left basically society behind. We know from the narrative that something has gone on in the world, but she has gone to live on this mountain and sort of live reclusively away from everybody else. She lives off the land. She does some trading with a gentleman that lives in the nearest town. And then one day soldiers show up. Say that two times fast. They are hunting for the rain heron. They believe that it really does exist and they want to take it back because they want for it to be studied. And this woman has a history with the rain heron and she wants to protect it, but things go in a certain way and these stories come together. The soldiers are led by a woman that we get to learn her backstory too and where she comes from. And then all of it sort of comes together as we notice that sometimes it takes tragedy to get to a point where we do the right thing. There's a lot of tragedy in the book, but there's also a lot of forgiveness, and there's a lot of discussion regarding relationships, not only with mothers, fathers, but also with the people that surround you. This book was fantastic. It's hard to explain. It's slightly dystopian, slightly folkloric, and it's sort of a mix of both of those things. The characters are really well drawn. I was completely absorbed in the book and I wanted absolutely to know what was going to happen next. I loved it. So that's The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott. This is out from FSG Originals in the US on February 9th, 2021. I believe it's already out in the UK and in Australia, so you can probably get your hands on it. The next book I read was for my book club that meets every 3 months, and that was Cuyahoga by Beatty. Now, I had heard great things about Cuyahoga by Pete Beatty, and unfortunately for me, this book was sort of like a middle-of-the-road book. This is the story. It's set in the 1800s, I believe, like the middle 1800s, around Cleveland, Ohio. There's a river, the Cuyahoga River, and there are 2 cities on either side, Cleveland and Ohio City. And in a sort of tall tale sort of way, we get the story of Big Brother, who is like this hero that goes around doing these amazing feats, very Johnny Appleseed, if you will. And the story is told from his younger brother's perspective, sort of what goes on in this town. And the town sort of focuses on the fact that there's going to be this bridge that spans the river and how that bridge brings animosity between the 2 cities. But we also have the older brother who is trying to find ways to sort of start earning a life that would allow him to marry the woman that he loves, but she wants nothing to do with him, to be honest with you. And he wants to change that perspective. And what happens is we get sort of this tale of how this town and these people all go together. Unfortunately for me, and keeping it in this sort of folklore tone, Pete was a step away from everybody for me. Like, I didn't feel like I really got to know anyone well enough to truly care about their outcome. And at times I found sort of the tale aspect of it a little tiresome. I got tired of it after a while. I think that he's talented. I think he writes a very good sentence. He's very descriptive. But overall for me, I think it was a form thing, like a structure thing, a decision regarding how he was going to tell his tale that to me sort of just took me out of the story. And I wanted to love it more than I did. It's a solid read. It's an interesting read, but I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. So that is Cuyahoga by Pete Beatty, and this is out now from Scribner. You can get your hands on it in any bookstore if it's something you like. If you like those sort of tall tale sort of things, you may really like it. It just didn't quite work for me. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk about is another interesting book where I'm probably going to have a little bit of a polarizing opinion on, and that is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is out from Swoon Reads. This was actually a book that came out last year that I was really, really excited about. So this is the story of a young Latinx trans boy who, Yadriel, who is a member of a family of witches. The men's are brujos and the women are brujas. And he has transitioned at an early age and he wants to be a brujo more than anything in the world. And he is not being allowed because of sort of the stigmas in his family, the lack of wanting to really, his parents and family wanting to acknowledge his transition, and they still want to treat him as a girl when he is clearly a boy. And so what he decides to do is he decides to go and do this ritual, which gives him sort of the powers of the brujo to prove to his family that he is actually a brujo. And what he winds up doing is pulling up the spirit of a young boy who has just died and going on an adventure to determine who killed him, and also his cousin is missing. And they can't figure out where his cousin's body is, and his spirit hasn't come, because all of the brujos and brujas can actually see the spirits. They actually live in a really cool, atmospheric graveyard. And this is sort of that adventure. That's the adventure of them finding it, as also as Yadriel comes to terms with who he is, his relationship, or how he feels about this boy that he has found and is helping. And also he has a fantastic cousin who is just all sass, and I absolutely love her. And she's great. Let me talk about the stuff that I really liked about the book. I love that Latinx trans boys and men are going to see themselves in this book. I remember when I was younger and I read my first book with a gay heroine, hero actually, and how that sort of changed everything for me. And I'm so excited that this book exists for those young men out there trying to find themselves in the world. I actually think that trans boys, trans girls are going to be happy to see themselves in literature. And I think that Yadriel is a very nice example of that. And it will really allow them to have a place to go, to see themselves in a YA fantasy novel, right? My issues with the book are twofold, okay? The first one is this book is so slow. To be honest with you, it was a little hard for me to actually finish because the book occurs over only a few days and it's not that long. It's like 360 pages, right? But day one is the first 200 pages. And so it takes forever for this book to sort of get going. And when it does finally get going in the last 50 pages, it's exciting, but it took a long time to get there. And to me, I was just like, for a YA novel with witches and people missing and, you know, ghosts, I just felt that there should have been more action, immediate action. I don't know if that makes any sense. That part was a little bit of a struggle for me because I at times was like, okay, let's get on. A lot of things became repetitive to me. The other thing that was an issue for me is Aiden Thomas wants to talk about Yadriel's transition. He wants to talk about everything that Yadriel's going through, and he absolutely should. Unfortunately, at times, in wanting to do so, he disconnected himself from the narrative for me, and it didn't always mesh. Like, there was a lack of connectivity between his message and his story. And I know it's really hard sometimes to get both of those things to sort of coexist. But for me, at times, I was just sort of withdrawn from the story. I really felt it was like two different books. It was one, this sort of fantasy YA novel, and then on the other side of it was a story of a young Latinx trans man becoming who he was. And I almost could have separated those two stories because I felt that they had power individually, but together didn't always go well for me. I quite liked the end of the book. I thought it was a fantastic ending. I think there's a lot of talent in this book. I think the story is well told. I think it could have clearly been sped up a little bit. I love the representation. It's very important to me, to my community, and to many, many young people in America. But for me, it just didn't always work out the way I wanted it to. So that's my opinion. Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I think you should read it and give it a try on your own. You know, you may not feel at all the way I felt, and it may all go perfectly for you, and that's what I really, really hope. But I'm really happy that the book exists and that there's a place for young trans Latinx men to go to see themselves in literature. Okay, last two books. We're going to go into some science fiction fantasy. Actually, it's all fantasy. And look at this amazing cover. This is When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nghi, and I'm saying her first name wrong. I'm so sorry. But I loved this little novella. So good. This is about a woman who is, oh, actually, no. The main character is non-binary. They are on a trip up a mountain to sort of investigate. They take knowledge back and they write down history and they write down stories. And they are traveling up through the mountain when they are ambushed by a group of women that actually turn into tigers as well. It's sort of based on this sort of folkloric tale. And it turns into this sharing of stories. Now, what it is that the main character is telling a story to the tigers that the tigers already know about their own history. But they want to know how it's being told. And it causes sort of this tension as they correct our storyteller. But our storyteller is truly interested in the truth. So they want to make sure that the story they're telling is accurate. So it's sort of this sharing of stories as they learn history about this group, and also sort of they're trying to fend off this group of tigers eating them. And ending everything. There's like a woolly mammoth that is being ridden. There is this history of this romance. So it's got this sort of romance angle to it. It's so good. And this is the second book set sort of in the world that Ms. Vo writes about. The first one was The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which I absolutely adored. So I had to get her second book. And this one was just as good. So this is When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. And I'm going to hold her first name up there, last name Vo. Love this book. Her first full-length novel is coming out this year, and I cannot wait. It's like some sort of fantasy retelling of The Great Gatsby, and I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Okay, you guys, so the last book I'm going to hold up is going to seem a little bit weird. So Riverhead sent me an early copy of this book, but I've never received a copy of a book that looks like this before. So this is No One Is Talking About This. And this is the debut fiction novel by Patricia Lockwood. Now, you guys remember her maybe from her memoir, Priest Daddy, that was out. And she's also, I have not read any of her poetry, but I hear she is a fantastic poet. So I'm holding this up here. This is mainly for the title. No One Is Talking About This comes out in early February. So you are going to be able to get your hands on this one very, very quickly. Now, this book challenged me because this book is told in a very unique style. It's almost told in Twitter speak. So very short paragraphs, a lot of references to pop culture. Our main character is sort of famous for this one phrase that she put out there into what they call the portal, and it sort of allowed her to go around and give talks. And that's sort of what the whole first half of the book is about. And then the part of her family and something in her family happens in the second part of the book, which I'm not going to spoil for you, which sort of changes the perspective. But it always is in sort of the short, blurby, tweety. It's longer than a tweet because it's not 140 characters, but it's definitely got that feel, like that sort of punch. So if I had to compare it to anything, I would say it reminded me of a lot of like Jenny Offal, who wrote The Department of Speculation and Weather. I cannot remember the name of her second book. I'm so sorry. Also reminded me a lot of sort of like Maggie Nelson, like The Argonauts, sort of that brief punch of a narrative and then sort of pull you back, take you somewhere different, pull you back. Like her, you know how Maggie Nelson does it. To me, there were a couple things. One, I think that the book does something different than that I've ever done, that I've ever read. And so I really applaud it for that. I don't know that I am the person that should read this book because I don't think of the world in this way. And at times there were references to things that I didn't know. And as a reader, I don't really stop to look those things up. So at times I was a little bit like, I'm not sure exactly what the message is, but I was so intrigued with the narrative and the character and how Patricia was making them whole as the book was going along. So all of these snippets, if you started to put them together, sort of became the puzzle that was our main character. And I found that fascinating. This book really challenged me, so I think that it will challenge some readers. Some readers will just slide right into it. They'll just really feel it. And I think that's fantastic. I want to be challenged. I definitely want to read stuff like I've never read before, and that definitely happened here. So that is No One Is Talking About It by Patricia Lockwood. And this is out in the middle of February. So in a couple weeks, I think February 16th, I believe, is when it comes out. So I think that if that is your jam, you're going to like it. So those are the 6 books. That was a lot of differing opinions. I hope that you guys liked what I had to say. And I hope that these books all wind up on your TBR. I think all of them have something to say. And I think that you may gel with them differently than I did. So I hope that you'll pick them up if they sound interesting to you. As always, if you're a return subscriber, I could not do this without you. If you are new to my channel, thank you very much. I hope you come back for more, and I hope you really like what you saw. So as always, I encourage you to shop locally, read globally, and until next time, I wish you happy reading. Bye!